Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I welcome you on behalf of the Malta Business Network. My name is Ruben Mifsud. I will be moderating today's session. I will be asking the questions in terms of the rest of the session, and we are accompanied by a panel of experts. And I'm delighted to be introducing the experts that will be taking our questions today. So for today's session, I would like to welcome Dr. Jacqui Taylor. Jacqui is the CEO and founder of Flying Binary, a cyber essentials web science company. Jacqui holds an honorary doctorate in science. She's an expert advisor to the UN, EU, UK, and G20, and more recently, UK Cabinet Office. Jacqui's been recently nominated in the top 15 UK tech influencers, and she's an accomplished entrepreneur. Amongst other things, she's a Global 100 leader, top 10 global IoT innovator, and globally recognized as the world's first smart city czar. It's a true honor to have you back and to welcome you back to the MBN, Jacqui.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, Ruben.
In Malta, we have Martin Camilleri. Martin is the lead for MITA, the Malta IT agency. He leads the cyber threat intelligence team with over 2 decades of experience in technical and management roles on cybersecurity. Martin, he's a graduate on cyber international law. He has represented Malta government on various EU and international bodies, and he's heavily involved in the setting up of the national cybersecurity strategy for Malta. Martin, welcome. We look forward to hear a bit more about the cybersecurity. We do have a few questions on that.
Thank you, Ruben, for the introduction. And I salute all the participants and look forward for a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Martin. And completing the panel is Dr. Maria Grazia Vigliotti, CEO of Sandblocks Consulting, specializing in auditing code, security testing, and blockchain. Maria has a career spanning over 20 years in computing. She has led the cybersecurity strategy for the entire British railway industry and the European railway traffic management systems, and has advised the UK nuclear industry with a focus on infrastructure security. Maria has a PhD in computing from Imperial College London, is an academic at Imperial College London, and she's also the Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence at Imperial College London. I can spot a pattern here. Maria, welcome.
Hello, Ruben, and hello to everybody who is following. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So, in terms of today's session, we've got a panel of experts, and we do have a number of questions which we gathered in advance of the session. Thank you, everyone that have contributed. I should add that we are recording the session, so the session will be made available on the MBN website, but it will be available for members only. In terms of the session today, the focus is going to be very much on the practical elements of cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is a very broad subject, and we saw this when we had our first session back in May earlier this year, where we had a session led by Dr. Jacqui Taylor, and we had some really good insights in terms of what's happening right now with regards to the isolation economy, which we'll be talking about later, and how the disruption driven by COVID pandemic has accelerated working from home, the uptake of IoT devices, and how that trend is globally likely to carry on increasing, and the risks that come with that that need to be managed. We also learned about some EU directives which will be impacting EU and broader in terms of countries, in terms of an attempt to standardize a lot of the approaches and the best practice sharing across countries and across organizations as well, and across industries. And we also learned a bit about the approaches to take at a national level and at an organizational level in terms of managing the risks of cybersecurity. the follow-up for today's session is focusing a little bit more on of the practical aspects, I guess, of cybersecurity. And I think of it in terms of how I come at it myself. So myself as a founder of Tasica, and we specialize in intelligent automation for financial services, that's bank and insurance companies. And a lot of the work that we do, the nature of the industries tends to involve a significant investment in time and money for InfoSec and cybersecurity. And that is something which, as a small business, the effort that goes into that can be quite substantial, particularly when we think about banks and financial institutions. You have to be able to demonstrate the right best practices in place in order to be able to just pass muster for onboarding with these organizations. So that brings me to the first question that we have with regards to the impacts of or the importance rather of cybersecurity from an SME perspective in terms of the effort and time that's needed. And I guess this is a question that I will open up to all three of the speakers. We'll start with you, Jacqui, thinking in terms of as an SME, am I really at risk of cybersecurity attacks?
You are. Looking at it a global point of view, every 32 seconds, a hacker attacks some organization online. So let's just start with that. From the World Economic Forum point of view, we looked at this as a research area. Now, we don't have data across all the nations across the world, but of the 141 countries that we do have, cyber attacks and data fraud, because of course it's about not always just about money, then it's about grabbing the data. Essentially, the annual cost of cybercrime and that attack is increasing, and it's exponentially increasing. And it's ranked in the top 5 most pressing risks for all organizations across those 141 countries. But 58% of cybercrime is actually targeted in SMEs, and mainly because they're the most unprotected part of our estate. And the 7 largest economies in the world, it's their most pressing risk. So the investment that goes in at a nation state level actually understands that the SME landscape is a big risk area. Now, I think just about Europe, 95% of all our economy in Europe is actually SMEs. In the UK, it would be 99%. So from a futures point of view, this is a huge risk area. And I think that the reality of it is it's something that most people don't necessarily consider, or if they do, they don't know where to start. But often it's making the case. So I'm going to pop in the chat to everybody a link to that World Economic Forum research, and to say this is the sort of thing that I'm seeing conversations not just at board level, but round the lunch tables as part of forward planning for 2022. And I've hosted this on Fly Binary Tech, so you're welcome to share it within your organizations. And I think it really just makes the point 58% of all cybercrime is against SMEs. So when we talk about this, it's actually very key to everybody that's listening and our economies.
Yeah, that's interesting. So thinking about the work that you do, Maria, because I know that you work with entrepreneurs quite a lot. Does that relate? Do you see that happening in terms of kind of the work that you do as well?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I think Jacqui made a great case for SMEs, but also for younger entrepreneurs. The trouble, I mean, there are 2 issues around SMEs and micro organization for cybersecurity. One of them is that it requires an extra effort on top of what people need to do. And the other thing is a little bit of a mental barrier, which is we always perceive the hacker as somebody who will attack, say, the financial services, and very often, because there is, as Jacqui said, it seems that the idea is that there is money, and also we have this perception that there is somebody who is actually actively doing things manually. You know, somebody's attacking a website or somebody's attacking an online system, but actually a lot of the attacks are today automatized, and also you know, we have moved from a system where people would have to do something manually to a system where actually you can buy pieces of software that will perform an attack on your behalf for a relatively small amount of money. And so this happens typically on the dark web, which is the part of the web that we most of us don't have access, or you need to have a special way to have access to that. But very often the economics of cybercrime is a little bit underestimated. So you know, you can today buy a piece of software. It could be ransomware or a way of phishing emails. You know, for between a few $100s to a few thousand, and potentially you have the opportunity to simply run it without having to do too much, yourself. Simply launch it on the internet, making exactly as a lottery. You try to attack thousands of SMEs. Maybe only a few of them will be subject to the attack, and all of a sudden you have made 30 times as much money you have invested. So if you think about the cybercrime as a very as a business, all of a sudden it makes sense. So just to be very clear, you are not attacked yourself. You are simply a lottery number who will be somehow made a victim. And just to be very clear, I mean, I think Jacqui made a very clear point around the fact that we don't have statistics worldwide, but I'm talking about the UK. The UK issues every year the kind of attacks they have, the Cybersecurity Center has seen, and I would invite everybody from different countries to look at such government disclosure. And in the case of the UK, we have that around 46% of businesses have been attacked. It's true that most of them are large businesses, but also 62% of small businesses have been attacked. So just to give it a very clear idea that actually, you know, although you are small, don't underestimate the fact that you are a pawn in a much bigger theater, and you can be a victim of the attack. And this is true also for entrepreneur and micro businesses. You know, all what you need is that you don't look after your email, and you are effectively a target for an attack.
So it sounds like a number game, and certainly in terms of the email bit, we do have some questions later on, which we'll be coming back to as well, definitely. But it'd be interested to see, Martin, from your end, whether that is the same scenario that you see in Malta.
Yes, in fact, a lot of similarities, which my colleagues have already mentioned, are in the Maltese scenario also. Even protecting the infrastructure is becoming more and more important, not only for large organizations or governmental organizations, but even small organizations. For example, one which I can say about is a practical example which we had come across some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not exactly sure, was that one of the local SMEs, which was an influential supplier of ICT equipment, was compromised, and the attacks even reached government, sort of. We managed through our infrastructure to detect those attacks and subdue those attacks, so they did not adversely affect the government. But the impact was large, although that the entity or the organization was a small one. So it doesn't really, it is related, being a victim of a cyber attack is not related to the size, but even if you are a small organization and you have been compromised, first of all, you have your own business which has been compromised, and then you will suffer from your business and things like that. But also you can adversely affect other organizations within your country or within other countries.
How thinking about that, how would a small business in that case then deal with these risks? Because it sounds to me like the attacks, the attempts can be as sophisticated in a big organization as they can be for a smaller organization. So a lot of the organizations and the SMEs are likely to not have the expertise internally within those organizations. And this is a question for Maria in terms of us as or any other organization which is a small non-technical company. How can I work with the right kind of providers or third parties that can help make sure that the work that we do is suitable for what is required?
Yeah, I think it's a very challenging question because cybersecurity is also perceived as expensive, and very often, you know, you really want to be very clear about your budget and how your budget effectively helps you to manage cybersecurity risks. It's very difficult to say whether there is a sort of one size fits all, but I would say that there are opportunities for the SMEs to actually protect themselves, and one of them is to really think about very clearly about their sector and what is their assets, and they can engage with providers. The problem is really to select which one is the best provider for them. Generally, the first thing you really need to understand and make a list is what are your assets and what is it that you need some kind of help with. That sort of drives what kind of provider can help you through your particular needs, because obviously, from a small infrastructure from a small company that serves even, for example, a national infrastructure, they could have different needs from a kind of sole trader, or say a company that simply can tend to work in isolation, exactly for the earlier comments by Martin, that if you are part of a supply chain, you not only need to think about your own, how cybercrime could affect you, but also how it could affect the supplier around you. And obviously, equally, you need to think about which are your suppliers in turn and how they could affect you. And although this sounds very complicated, for many business, really, there are a few big hygiene, small things they can do really to start to protect from very common attack, and sort of, really checking their password and making sure, they have patches, they have some form of firewall, and they sort of go with very reputable companies, or reasonably reputable companies that can sort of protect them. And depending on the size that you have, you may engage with, more people who can help you. But in many sense, if you think about structuring your own cybersecurity posture, you want to think about where I'm vulnerable, what are roughly my risks, what is the impact if something happens, and how I can monitor that whatever measure I have taken with whatever provider, actually it works. And if I am attacked, I can recover quickly. And this leads to 4 questions you can ask to your provider, and in a sense it gives you a sort of strategy towards towards what you can do to protect yourself, and also how to select a provider. There are I just like to add one last thing before concluding, and that is, in some cases you can work also regarding from the sector, as I said. Some of the requests around your cybersecurity posture can be more stringent depending on whom you are supplying to, right? And those are part of the critical risk assessment that you want to make. And also this kind of consideration will have an impact on what is the cost for you if you were attacked, and what are the consequences for you if you were attacked. But in a sense, if you think about around those 4 pillars, what looks a little bit a mythology can all of a sudden become very manageable. And you think about which kind of companies can help you to address each part of the pillar that I have just mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Maria. So you mentioned, she mentioned the risks and the consequence, I guess, of these attacks, and trying to understand the impact of them. Obviously, there's always the financial aspect of it, but then there's the broader aspects when it comes to risk mitigation. We do have a question. Someone did raise a question around what is cybersecurity insurance and should I get one? Do you think that is something which could help with that managing of consequences?
Definitely. I strongly, I think, I didn't want to mention immediately because cybersecurity insurance is a very, very young, a reasonably young area of insurance. But I think if you are a very small SME, so let's say around 6 to 10 million revenue, cyber insurance is a great way to actually protect yourself. There are many reasons for that. It's not just that you pay, you get paid if you are a victim of a cyber attacks, but nowadays there are new products in cyber insurance whereby the insurance before insuring you will force you to make a list of all the assets you have. They will force you to think about the risk. They will do a minimum of penetration testing and investigation around a number of potential vulnerability, and then they will provide as part of the insurance a response team that will help you to recover very quickly. So they will, in a sense, offer you the opportunity to have a kind of consultancy and to ensure that your business has some very basic cybersecurity in place, which will cover a large part of the attacks, and then they will insure you for very specific risks that require attacks that are much more sophisticated and that by their nature are much rarer. And so I think, it's a great way to have the opportunity to recover very quickly. Yes, it requires a little bit of an expenditure, but very often those things are very manageable in comparison to the damages that we can have. I just want to give some ideas how much cybersecurity costs, how much cybercrime can cost. If you, for any reason, you just need an email for this. If your employee by mistake and clicks on the wrong URL on the email, and you get some ransomware, so all your data gets encrypted. On average, it takes 5 days for businesses to recover the data if they have data backup. And so if you think about how much it would cost you if a ransomware were you were attacked by a ransomware, it would be 5 working days of your whole company stopping working. That's your cost, on top of the trouble of having to look for security, on top of the trouble of having to recover everything and doing quite a lot of work. So if you think in these terms, cybersecurity and cyber insurance offers you the opportunity to actually, as soon as you have an attack, to actually being back on your feet very, very quickly. So that's, I hope this makes the point rather clearly.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maria. And I noticed, Jacqui, that you had your hands raised for a bit, actually, and I know that you might have some views on this as well.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, agree with everything Maria says. From the World Economic Forum research, on average, an SME will lose 12% of turnover. So if you think about, obviously, everything Maria said, but often it's a question of how do I ring fence a budget to be able to do some cyber mitigation and pay for insurance. So that's my, I've given you a link in the chat to be able to take that World Economic Forum research. That's one of the reasons I've done that, because 12% of your turnover should be the minimum you're investing as an SME. And the reputational damage around that is not included in it. So that's the sheer cash and cost of that. Since the ransomware attacks have escalated to become largely a tsunami and the number one problem we have in our industry today, then essentially where we are now is the underwriters for all the insurance products are querying the cyber insurance across all the sectors. And so what I can tell you about that work I'm involved in is that it's going to become more granular about what products are being offered and who will qualify for those products, which leaves us at a nation state level a risk that's not mitigated that we know about. I can't really say too much about that because there's a sort of nation state conversations that are going on. But what I would say is to be on at least the first rung of the ladder. And I would advise 12% of your turnover is what you're looking at. As the underwriters change the insurance products, if you're not actually there, then you will find it very difficult to get the new products. So this is the time, as we come out, as we're unlocking the isolation economy, to be able to take that cyber insurance out. And like I say, 12% is my guide in terms of what risk you're mitigating. And then that actually will qualify you in for the changes the insurance industry across the world is now going to make, as we're understanding what a post-pandemic world looks like. So I'm sure that you've heard this before, but timing's everything. And the reality of it is cyber insurance now is something that if you don't have it, I really do recommend you investigate and you take out in order to be able to move forward with the global changes that are being made.
Interesting. No, thanks for that, Jacqui. That's extremely useful to understand as well. Absolutely. I mean, we do have some questions as well about, future of cybersecurity and innovations and so on. And part of that might be kind of, these products developing and evolving over time. So we'll probably come back to that. But I was thinking we do have a few questions around MITA specifically and Malta and how those two come together when it comes to cybersecurity. So probably is a good time to bring Martin into the conversation and ask Martin now. I know that we will have a mix of UK and Malta-based attendees for this webinar today. So most people might know about MITA, but not quite everyone. So if you could explain a bit about the organization as well as the roles within the cybersecurity space.
Yes, of course. Well, MITA stands for Malta Information Technology Agency. And MITA was founded almost 30 years ago with the specific objective at the time to business process re-engineer the government's business processes and make its processes digitally, sort of, and to have a more efficient government. From then on, MITA grew and became the IT services provider for the government of Malta. And it provides the IT infrastructure and the server hosting, applications, the application development for government. And from then on, around the year 2000, there was the need to, or there was the realization that all this data being processed, all this government data being processed, this data needs to be protected. And around in the year 2000, the Information Security Department within MITA was formed. It was just a very small department at the time and taking care only to protecting limited parts of the infrastructure, especially the desktop part. But from then on, coming to this day, the cybersecurity aspect MITA is involved in is quite extensive. MITA protects the whole government infrastructure on all areas of the IT, starting from the network, going up to the application. And we have a specific department now for security, which is the Information Security and Governance Department, which is made up of a security operations team, which is the team which monitors the infrastructure continuously for cyber threats. It is the equivalent of the CSIRTs, maybe the Computer Security Incident Response teams. And we continuously monitor the government infrastructure for oncoming threats, and we subdue those threats and try to keep them as far away as possible. Then within the team itself, we have the specialists, the advanced operation team, which are a team of specialists who are responsible for the red teaming and the design of the secure infrastructure for new infrastructure. We do red teaming, as Maria said. The government, or MITA, has an extensive program of penetration testing and vulnerability assessments continuously to make sure that any vulnerabilities on the government infrastructure are detected beforehand and they are protected. Then we have the security governance team, which is the team responsible for making sure that the security policies, procedures are adhered to within the company. And there is the cyber threat intelligence team, which has been recently set up to make sure to start looking ahead of possible cyber threats that may come and try to prepare beforehand to those attacks. Last but not least, we have the NCC, which is the National Coordination Center, which we previously was known as the Cyber Awareness Team. And this team is not only involved within the government infrastructure, but it also has a national portata. Because the NCC embarks on national initiatives also. The main initiative which they were working on before the NCC was set up was the Cybersecurity Awareness Program across the whole nation. And because it was one of the goals of the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And we also believe that awareness is, I think, the first step and the major step to embark on to be cyber secure. But then this year, this unit has evolved into the National Coordination Center, whereby, apart from being responsible for the cyber awareness campaign, it is also going to be responsible for coordinating EU research projects with a cybersecurity team. The EU issues a number of funds every year for research projects, and the cybersecurity research projects will be managed by the NCC. And any entities like academia, private sector, SMEs, who are interested in a particular research project, they could apply with the NCC and form part of that project and use those funds to carry out the research project. Well, basically that's it, sort of, from in a nutshell, sort of, which MITA.
It's quite a broad role, and there's quite a lot of work going on there, and it sounds like that there's quite a lot happening on the cybersecurity front. So the question that we do have, because when you mentioned the NCC and Cybersecurity Malta, is how can these be of assistance to local businesses, to smaller business and SMEs?
Yes, in fact, the NCC, as I have already explained, is that the EU from every year, the programs were used to be Horizon 2020. I think the next one for the coming year is Horizon Europe. They allocate a budget to encourage member states and entities within those member states to embark on research projects. The NCC is there to facilitate the process for any SMEs, for example, who wish to embark on a project, not by themselves only, but they can also form part of a consortium on a particular research project which relates to cybersecurity, and then the NCC would be in a position to facilitate the application and try to acquire funds for those SMEs to embark on their project. And that's how the NCC will be formulated, sort of, it will be working.
Okay. And in terms of finding out, again, as a small business, as to how to go about doing this, who to speak to, which route to take.
Yes, from time to time, we have our own website, which is Cybersecurity Malta, and from time to time there will be announcements on these types of projects. Additionally, we also embark on other schemes which will assist SMEs in improving their infrastructure. The last scheme we had was called the Be Secure scheme, and it was a scheme where SMEs were encouraged to apply to a number of initiatives, like, for example, training their staff, and it was all budgeted and financed by MITA, and it was quite a successful scheme. There were a lot of initiatives. One of them was training the staff of the applicants, doing risk assessments, and helping out SMEs how to do a cyber risk assessment and IT risk assessment, and a lot. Right now there are no schemes, but if such schemes are reintroduced, sort of, these will be available on the website, Cybersecurity Malta website, and SMEs can easily follow the instructions for registration and participation.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And on that point, because I noticed that we do have a question actually on the chat from Keith Abella, with regards to cybersecurity awareness training. I know that Jacqui responded to that. Thank you, Jacqui. But I was wondering, Keith, from your end, if the question you had here with regards to the training side, or whether it's a broad question around what can be done, or whether it's something specific to the Malta context and MITA side of things. If so, please let us know, and we'll come back to that point as well. But in the meantime, I mean, thank you for that, Martin, because that's extremely helpful in understanding, certainly kind of all the good things that are happening at MITA and the leading role that the agency is taking on that front. A lot of it sounds like is about information sharing, best practice sharing, and that is something which I know we'll be talking about as well. But we do have some other questions which are these are questions that were came in by email, and they are from Rob Jones. Rob, he's raised two questions, so I'll take them one at a time, I guess. The first one is with regards to email, and Rob says email is at the heart of most business communication and a major contributor to what went wrong when a data breach, fraud, or hack occurs. Considering that email is essentially transmitted, stored, and forwarded from sender in plain text, what changes should businesses implement to prevent email from being breached, tracked, or manipulated? His question is, are encrypted email solutions a good idea, useful for certain use cases, or a necessity? And again, I can imagine that this is a question that probably all the panels will have a view on. So I'll probably start with Maria on this one in terms of the email and the view of how small organizations should be encrypting, if at all.
I think that it's always a good idea to encrypt emails. It's certainly a protection in terms of avoiding that the content of the email gets manipulated. And the other thing is that it also ensures that confidential information doesn't go somehow send out. One of the beauty about encrypting emails is that when I was a student, that was really something for the few techie who knew how to do it. You had to download some kind of open source software. There was a PGP and so on and so forth. And it seemed a little bit of an overreach. People would put, at the end of their email, their public key so that you could encrypt. And today, actually, there are a lot of emails clients who have the encryption already in there. So they manage all the technical stuff around, keeping the private key into the email and sending the public key, and managing all the keys. So you don't really have to worry about that. You don't need to be a techie. You don't need to know what cryptography is. You simply click on encrypt my emails, and then the software will do everything. And I think it is a good practice, and it's more about a habit. Sometimes we think, oh, this email is not important, who is going to read it? But actually it's about the habit of encrypting everything so that you can actually then, when something important is sent, it should not be manipulated. So that's quite. I do believe it's quite important, and it also it sort of resonates with the idea that of the supply chain. If you are a member of the supply chain, a breach of your email or a breach of the confidentiality of your email could have a huge impact in terms of data breaches to the organization you are supplying to. So I think that really in this day and age, encrypting an email is really relatively easy. It should really become common practice.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maria. Jacqui, I don't know whether you have any complementary views to that.
Maybe not complimentary, but so 92% of malware is delivered by email. And whilst I don't disagree with encryption services, companies are not doing what they can do with their own email systems, because in terms of the investigations that when things go wrong, on average, only 5% of companies have actually protected their internal structure, their documentation, the folders they use, and all of that. And at Flying Binary, we don't use encrypted email for most things, and that's primarily because we don't use email. And in common with many SMEs, email's not our gig. It's just not what we use. Now, obviously, for our government clients, we use something completely different. And I think that it's very interesting as to, there's not one answer is what I would say, Rob. It really depends on your setting. And I'm not trying to avoid things there, but what I do, if in a setting I'm going to recommend it encrypted email, I will recommend the likes of Proton. And the reason for that is part of the terms and conditions. So I should say this actually, if you haven't heard me speak before, free is never free. I would never recommend any software of any kind that's free. You're the product and the cyber risk is built in, and you're open to it by doing that. So whenever I talk about anything, it's always paid for. But one of the terms and conditions for Proton is that they may log your IP if you're a criminal suspect. It's a fantastic terms and condition because criminals don't like it and therefore generally don't use it. So from that point of view, I'm not saying no criminals use it, but it's a way of off-putting the criminals as part of their offering. And I think that some of the premium plans of some of the encryption email software providers actually have got like storage facilities. I'm not talking about Proton now, but generally more storage, priority customer support, which if you have an incident, you'll need. And so I think it's a setting piece in terms of what in your context, what risk are you managing? Are you actually using the tools you have in what we call a cyber safe way at Flying Binary? Are you just diving in there? Is it an all you can eat feast? Is email one of your key risks? In our company, it's not, because we largely don't use it other than for some client work. And so I would say that, I know you were looking for an answer on this, Rob. I think the reality of it is it's context for you. The other thing I would say as well, in terms of the move to encrypted email, the fact that the main email suppliers do not have a term and condition that says that they won't pass over the contents of the email to any government that their jurisdiction in is another piece why people are moving to encrypted email. But it's not, for me, must do it, because the companies of the future and those of us that work in the industrial Internet of Things don't actually use email. So a setting for now from a tactical point of view and then strategic point of view, I think you, like the rest of us, will move off that. Oh, we've got a question and follow up from there, Ruben, from Noreen.
We do, yes, that's just come in, yeah, asking a question around the spam mail that seems to get generated and attaches itself to company email addresses. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome, Rob. On that one, Noreen, and in terms of spam filters and what have you, with dependent on your email provider and dependent on the focus they're putting on that actually varies quite considerably. But because the content that has got a spam attachment to it, and effectively, you know, you can check on that. There are tools from the email providers to say whether you're actually you're going over the thresholds of that, and your domain is seen as unsafe and therefore a spam generator. So again, not knowing what your email provider is, but have a look at your email provider, and they will provide tools to see how bad a risk you are. And we would check that from our company's point of view on a quarterly basis. But as we're engineers, we sort of have some things in place that mean it doesn't trip any triggers. But yeah, I would definitely say you need to look at that on a quarterly basis, check where you are on that, because quite frankly, things like Black Friday, things like sort of Thanksgiving, Christmas, what have you, many people tip into that spam domain issue.
Okay, thanks for picking that up, Jacqui. In terms of the question that Noreen raised, we do actually have another question from Rob, which I'll get back to, but just having a quick double check in terms of time available. We will be finishing on the hour, so I just want to make sure that we have time to cover you know, the key questions that we've got coming up. Incidentally, if anyone who's online that would like to ask any questions, if we are unable to answer them today, please be assured that we will follow up, and there will be a note with the recording for the members, and there will also be any questions which are left unanswered. We will be following up on those as well. So keep them coming if you need to ask any more questions. But in the meantime, going back to Rob's second question. So Rob clearly works in the industry because he's talking about an incident with SolarWinds hack, which myself, I had to look it up on Google because I'm obviously not very familiar with things like this, but it sounds like it's a very high profile incident which affected many institutions globally. So the breach had significant implications in terms of the security of the product itself, and there were questions raised with regards to how safe is it to buy something that in itself is inherently at risk. So Rob is asking, should we be looking at, or rather, should companies be looking at development products and platforms that are not fashionable, cool, or based on the availability of someone who knows how to do it, but rather from a security viewpoint as the base? So Jacqui, I'll come back to you on this one because there's the global context about SolarWinds. If you could give us a bit of a sense of what the incident was, and then perhaps the broader question that Rob is asking.
Yeah, and it's an absolutely great question as well, Rob. So if I can take you back to 2017 when the UK was preparing its exit from the European Union, and we did a complete review of the cyber capability from a national point of view when we would be outside of the EU. And one of the key changes we made was we made the critical national infrastructure. We did a refresh of all of that and our approach to it and everything. When I had the opportunity to go to the G20 to look at the next steps plan, I actually did an assessment across G20 to see where the capabilities sat. Now that's because G20 is 40% of the world's GDP. So really an indication of where those nations sit and therefore where the rest of the world might be from this critical national infrastructure. It didn't go well. And so from that point of view, it's become a focus at nation state level. And Microsoft have formally accused effectively the Nobelium were the group that was seen to be the attackers for SolarWinds, and they have formally accused that they're a Russian spy outfit. And so what happened was the hackers used something called a supply chain attack. They weren't specifically going after SolarWinds, they were going after the supply chain of SolarWinds. Now, we talked about that before. Martin mentioned, an incident in Malta, and Maria's talked about the supply chain. And this is because these are becoming more prevalent. The reason this one was so different is it actually, the Orion system that was attacked, effectively malicious code was inserted into the Orion system. It actually is a product that actually scales across infrastructure monitoring and management. So essentially, a large part of the critical national infrastructure for the United States is on the back end of that supply chain. And so essentially, that's why it was such a major piece. And what it does is it targets the third party that has access to the organization's systems. So rather than trying to get at the network of SolarWinds, it actually got to the software and then attacked all the companies that are connected with that piece of software. And so you can remotely execute that malicious code on all the vulnerable systems, and that's exactly what they did. And really, as a follow-up on that, they did, the same group, Nebelium, did an email attack on 3,000 emails for what they got from the SolarWinds attacks, but that was able to attack 150 organizations, and at least a quarter of them were in the international development, humanitarian and human rights work. So the reality of it is a group originating in Russia were behind that SolarWinds attack, and then had the access to the critical national infrastructure of the United States. So that's why that tends to be spoken about in a very different way. And then the follow-on attack that Nebelium did was utilizing that, what they'd already understood, to do further pieces. So supply chain attacks at nation state level, we should expect them. And in terms of all the nation states are currently looking at their capability. And I know Martin's already talked about what Malta's doing about that.
Yeah, and bringing Martin into that particular point there, actually, did this SolarWinds incident have any impact on Malta at all?
Fortunately not, because we don't use SolarWinds as part of our core infrastructure. One of the problems with SolarWinds, as Jacqui quite clearly said, the problem with it was that SolarWinds is a product that resides on the core infrastructure of a particular organization. So getting access to that software or that service will impact the organization for sure. Having said that, the supply chain is very important. So be it that you form part of the supply chain or you get your services from the supply chain, if there is an attack on one of these services, they for sure adversely affect your organization.
Okay, so on that particular point, I mean, thank you, Martin, for that. But briefly, I'm going to ask Maria, in terms of the question that Rob raised with regards to the SolarWinds incident, is in terms of the security of the development tools and the programming and so on. And again, I know that from your end, you do quite a lot of work on the security of code. Is there such a thing as secure platform?
Well, the short answer is probably no, but I would like to say something about the difference between infrastructure and SME, and also the difference between sort of United States and the UK. So in the UK, I worked for both for the railway and the nuclear industry, and among the other things I've done, we were investigating code. So typically, when you have a big infrastructure that has its own supply chain, especially in the UK, although you don't produce everything yourself, you have a supply chain. That supply chain is subject to strict, rigorous parameters, and part of it is also that, for example, on regular basis, the government runs some form of penetration testing. Not all penetration testing are red team exercises. So red team exercises require a big team of individuals who do different things. But penetration testing can be much more localized. And although I can't say much more around that due to various restrictions, I can say that, for example, on our railway infrastructure, there are regular penetration testing that happen to make sure directly from our services and from our government to make sure that actually, very major weaknesses are not there. So that is not to say that everything is perfect, but just to say that, particularly in the UK and in Europe, we do have a very strict approach, and there is a very watchful eyes, because the infrastructure is very, very important. For other places like the nuclear industry, where there is a different kind of supply chain, so there isn't a specific supply chain because the industry is very small. I used to perform analysis of the code to make sure that any IoT would be brought into it. They would be not only secure but also safe. So there is quite a lot of, but obviously those things are very expensive. So if you are an SME, you may think, oh my God, but how can I protect myself? And I think that the best way to do that is, to some extent, to assume that everything is not everything, but most of the things that you are buying new, they could have some kind of problems. And what you want, there are two ways in which you can protect yourself. One is from a contractual point of view. Make sure that in your contract with your supplier, you have a very clear clause whereby if there is some kind of security breach, they are fully responsible for the damages. And be very clear, and again, having a very kind of clean way of hygienize where is it that your boundaries, and where is your supplier providing something, so that you can actually, if something happens, really divide and say, this is your responsibility, now you need to pay me off. Again, make sure that as a contractual obligation, the companies also will provide some resources for you to go back into businesses if in case something happens to your own business. And the other thing is that you can do some kind of very light penetration testing. Penetration testing used to be something really expensive and really done by a bunch of ex-military who would sort of do a lot of work. But today there are a lot of ethical hackers who may want to are prepared to do, for example, exploit your network, and they will kind of be paid only if they find vulnerabilities. So those are kind of bounty hackers. And you could also have ways in which you could say, okay, especially if you have web services, if you find any problem into our service, please, this is a way which you can inform us, and we will give you a reward for disclosing it directly to us as opposed to make it to the public. So there are a number of things that you can do which are much cheaper and would sort of protect you also from the supply chain. So I feel we are reaching the end of the talk, so I'll stop here. And obviously, please get in touch, and I'll be happy to provide more advice around the issue we discussed.
Okay. Thanks for that, Maria. That was really insightful, absolutely. And yes, you're right. We are tight for time. I can see that there's quite a lot going on the chat. So unfortunately, we won't be able to pick up those questions today. But certainly, there's some really insightful conversation going on. But we'll make sure that we do respond to those questions. The one question that I'd like to finish with, and this is the one that I'll focus on Jacqui in terms of kind of looking ahead. And Jacqui, I remember when you came for the first event, and you were talking about the work that you do. One of the many insightful things that you told us, one of the things that certainly stuck in my mind was when you said, we don't predict the future, we engineer it. And I would be very interested in finding out what is being engineered, what is the latest innovations in cybersecurity that you foresee in the few minutes that we have left.
Yeah, so in a few minutes we have left, that's not really possible. I'll talk about one thing that perhaps not everybody's heard about, which is a move from an industry point of view. Certainly in the UK, our National Cybersecurity Centre is already preparing this material, and will be, the outline of it will be launched, I'm hoping, very soon. But it's actually moving from the threat-based piece, which largely many people have moved from, through to a risk-based approach, and have what we're calling principle-based assurance. So we will be in the UK declaring the principles we're going to use to actually assure the cyber landscape for the UK. Obviously, that is work that is ongoing as part of the G7. But what that means is it will help people identify where their focus should be based on those principles, because every organization will have a response or a particular impact for those principles. And so what I've done in terms of making that WEF research available to everybody that's listening is, if you, and I'll just stick that in the chat again, if you get the download and share with colleagues, as I've said, if you also have the opportunity to be able to get the next installment before I'm back again, if you ever invite me back again. But it's imminent. We've agreed how we're going to tackle this in September, and it is something that we're preparing right now. So principle-based assurance will help all organizations to work out what their focus should be for their future, because we're often very generic in what we do, and not everybody wants to, everybody needs that, as I explained before, 12% of turnover going missing is key to us all. But how do you actually pick your focus, and what would you be your priorities? And principle-based assurance is a mechanism for doing that. So that's the latest thing that that G7's embraced and the follow-on countries want to look for.
Okay, thanks for that, Jacqui. That was, again, very, very well done. Apologies for the very unfair question, trying to get you to answer something which is so broad. But it's certainly, in terms of your point with regards to coming back, I know we'd be absolutely delighted to follow up from an MBN perspective, simply because we can see that the engagement in this session and the last session has always been extremely good, and we'll make sure that we do follow up with all the questions that have been raised by people. But in the meantime, mindful of the time that we don't have left, unfortunately, anymore, we'll finish it at that. I would like to point out that as part of the summary that will come out and the email that will come out in terms of this webinar, there will be a document from MITA, which Martin and his team prepared for us, which should give some signposts with regards to help and advice and gateways that people might want to reach out to in Malta. I think that will be an extremely good document to help everyone. In the meantime, as you can see, the speakers that we've had today have been terrific, very great insights, very busy people, no doubt, but if you direct any questions to us or the mailbox for Malta Business Network, we'll make sure that those questions are answered for you. So once again, thank you, Dr. Jacqui Taylor, Dr. Maria Grazia Vigliotti, Martin Camilleri, equally Brandwagon's team, to make sure that everything happened and worked properly, and of course Malta Business Network UK and Malta as the network supporting these very interesting events. So hope you all found it as useful and enjoyable as we did, and look forward to seeing to the next event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruben. And
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you all
Bye.
for your time.